Hello and welcome to The Restful Historian. Tonight, we are going somewhere few people ever see. We are descending beneath the most famous church in the world, beneath the marble floors where millions of pilgrims have walked, down into the forgotten city that lies below St. Peter's Basilica. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing in the vast, sunlit space of St. Peter's. The golden light streams through high windows. The dome soars impossibly high above you. Millions of tourists have stood exactly where you are standing, looking up in wonder at Michelangelo's masterpiece. But tonight, we are not looking up. Tonight, we are looking down. For centuries, these underground spaces were sealed, hidden, lost to memory and time. But in the 1,940 seconds, during the chaos of World War II, workers digging beneath the basilica made an extraordinary discovery. Beneath the Renaissance splendor, beneath the medieval crypts, they found something far older. They found a Roman cemetery, a necropolis, a city of the dead that had been waiting in darkness for nearly 2,000 years. Tonight, we will walk those ancient streets together. We will explore tomb after tomb, each one a time capsule preserving the names, hopes and beliefs of Romans who died when Christianity was still a hunted underground faith. We will follow the archaeologists as they searched, year after year, for the most important grave of all, the tomb of Peter, the fisherman who became the first pope, the rock upon which this entire basilica was built. But before we begin our descent, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to The Restful Historian. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight, so I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away, and let us descend together into the silent depths beneath the Vatican, where history sleeps in stone and shadow. Your journey begins not in 1940, but today. You are standing in St. Peter's Basilica on a quiet Tuesday morning before the crowds arrive. The air is cool and still, scented faintly with incense and candle wax. The marble beneath your feet has been polished smooth by millions of footsteps over 5 centuries. You can hear the distant echo of your own breathing in this vast space. A guide approaches. He is one of the few with keys to the lower levels. He leads you to an inconspicuous door, tucked away near the main altar. The door is heavy, made of dark wood reinforced with iron bands. It opens with a deep, resonant creak that seems to come from another century. Beyond it lies a staircase, descending into shadows. The stairs are marble, but not the brilliant white marble of the basilica above. These are older, darker, worn into smooth curves by centuries of papal feet. As you descend, the temperature drops. The air becomes denser, heavier, as if weighted with time itself. The brilliant gold and white of the Renaissance world above begins to fade, replaced by the dimmer, more ancient tones of the medieval period. You count the steps as you go down. 10, 20, 30. The sounds of the basilica, the whisper of tourists, the click of cameras, the shuffle of feet all fade away, replaced by a profound silence, broken only by your own footsteps and the sound of your breathing. This is the Vatican Grottoes, the first layer beneath the basilica. This is where popes are buried, where the recent dead rest near the ancient. The ceiling here is lower, pressing down. The light comes from electric bulbs now, but they are dim, designed to preserve the old frescoes and not disturb the atmosphere of reverent stillness. You walk slowly through this underground chapel. The walls are lined with tombs. Marble sarcophagi bear the names of popes you have heard of: John Paul II, Pius XII, John Paul I, who died after only 33 days. Their effigies lie atop their tombs in peaceful repose, hands folded in prayer, carved from cold white stone. But these are not what you came to see. These are the modern dead, resting in a space that is itself ancient, but not the oldest. You are searching for something deeper, something that predates all of this Christian grandeur. And to find it, you must go down further still. The guide leads you to another door, smaller than the first, almost hidden behind a marble column. This one is newer, installed in the 1,950 seconds after the Great Discovery. He produces a different key, longer and older looking. The lock turns with a heavy click. The door opens, and beyond it is darkness, true darkness, not just the dim reverence of the grottos above. This staircase is different. It is narrower, steeper. The steps are not marble but stone, rough and uneven. They were not built for tourists or pilgrims. They were built by archaeologists, carved through soil and debris, descending into a space that had been sealed for 16 centuries. You place your hand on the wall to steady yourself as you go down, and the stone is cold and slightly damp against your palm. Down you go, 20 more steps, 30. The air changes again. It is cooler still, but also thicker, filled with the smell of ancient earth and stone. It is the smell of a place that has been closed for a very long time. And with each step, you are travelling backward through history. Each metre of descent represents decades, then centuries of accumulated time. At the bottom of these stairs, you pause. The guide switches on a series of lamps, and slowly, gradually, like eyes adjusting to darkness, you begin to see where you are. You are standing in a narrow street, paved with ancient stones. On either side of you are building small brick structures with doorways and windows, now empty and dark. This is not a basement. This is not a crypt. This is a neighbourhood, a Roman neighbourhood, buried and forgotten, preserved in perfect darkness for 2,000 years. You have reached the Necropolis, the city of the dead, and your exploration of the true depths beneath the Vatican is only just beginning. The first thing that strikes you is how ordinary it looks. You expected something mystical, something obviously sacred. But this looks like a street in any Roman town, narrow, practical, lined with small buildings. The only difference is that these buildings have no second stories, no smoke rising from cooking fires, no voices calling from windows. These are houses built only for the dead. The street runs roughly east to west, following the slope of the ancient Vatican hill. It is barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The paving stones beneath your feet are uneven, worn smooth in some places, still rough in others. You can see the grooves worn by cartwheels, the places where rainwater once ran in channels down the slope. This was a working street once, in the bright sunshine of the 2nd century AD, where mourners came to visit their dead, where maintenance workers repaired tombs, where vendors perhaps sold flowers and incense to grieving families. But all that, life is gone now, sealed away when the Emperor Constantine decided to build his great Christian basilica on this exact spot in 324 AD. The Romans, practical as always, did not destroy the necropolis. They simply filled it in with earth, burying it completely, creating a level platform on which to build the new church. And there it stayed, forgotten, for 16 centuries, until a curious pope decided to search for the grave of St. Peter and accidentally rediscovered an entire neighbourhood. You walk slowly down the street, your footsteps echoing slightly in the enclosed space. The guide's lamp throws moving shadows on the walls. You stop at the first tomb on your right. It is a small building, perhaps 10 feet square, built of red brick with a peaked roof of terracotta tiles. The doorway is low, you would have to duck to enter. Above the door is a Latin inscription carved into a marble plaque. To the spirits of the dead, Marcus Caetennius Antigonus made this for himself, his wife, Flavia Procula, and his family. This is a family tomb, a middle-class Roman's investment in eternity. Marcus, whoever he was, saved his money to buy this plot on the Vatican Hill, outside the walls of the ancient city, along the road where respectable Romans built their eternal homes. He hired masons to build this little house of brick. He commissioned artists to decorate the inside. And here his family placed his body when he died, along with his wife when her time came, and their children, and perhaps grandchildren. This small brick building was their piece of immortality. You duck through the low doorway and enter the tomb. The space inside is tiny, perhaps 6 feet by 8 feet, but every surface is decorated. The walls are covered in frescoes, paintings done in earth tones red, yellow, ochre, white. The colours are faded now, softened by time, but you can still make out the images. There, on the left wall, is a peacock, symbol of immortality, its tail feathers spread in a fan of pride. On the right wall, a wreath of flowers surrounds a portrait. Perhaps Marcus himself, his face round and pleasant, looking out at you across 2,000 years, with an expression that might be contentment. The ceiling is painted to look like the sky, a deep blue with white clouds and small birds in flight. It is a reminder that the dead are not trapped in darkness, but have risen to something better. And on the floor, set into the stone, are two rectangular openings covered with stone slabs. These are the burial niches where the bodies once rested, either in sarcophagi or simply wrapped in shrouds. The tombs have long since been opened and emptied by ancient grave robbers or by the archaeologists of the 1940 seconds. But the paintings remain, still vibrant, still conveying the hope and care of a family that wanted their dead to rest in beauty. You step back out onto the street and continue walking. The next tomb is larger, grander. This family had more money. The doorway is framed with carved marble, and the inscription is longer, listing not just names but accomplishments. Inside, the decorations are more elaborate mosaic floors with geometric patterns, frescoes that show scenes from mythology. There is Orpheus, playing his lyre to enchant the beasts. There is Persephone, being carried away to the underworld, a story every Roman knew, a metaphor for death itself. Tomb after tomb lines the street. Some are tiny, barely more than closets. Others are substantial buildings with multiple rooms, family vaults where generations rested together. Each one is a small world of memory, a capsule of love and grief and hope. The names are Roman Marcus and Gaius, Flavia and Julia. The artwork is pagan gods and goddesses, mythological scenes, symbols of the old religion that once ruled this city. But as you walk deeper into the necropolis, moving from west to east toward the center of the basilica above, you begin to notice changes. The tombs are older here, dating back to the 1st and early 2nd centuries AD. And in some of them, mixed with the pagan symbols, are new images that seem out of place. There, in one tomb, barely visible in the dim light, is a figure with its arms outstretched, not in the pose of a Roman orator, but in the unmistakable gesture of Christian prayer. There, in another, is a fish, scratched into the plaster, the ancient Christian symbol, the Greek word for fish spelling out Jesus Christ, Son of God, Saviour. You are getting closer, closer to the heart of the mystery, closer to the reason this necropolis was so carefully filled in and preserved, closer to the tomb that was too sacred to disturb, even when building the greatest church in Christendom. You are getting closer to Peter. To understand why you are here, walking through this buried street, you must go back to December of 1939. The world is on the brink of war. In Rome, a different kind of urgency takes hold. Pope Pius XII, elected just months earlier, makes an unusual request. He wants to be buried in the Grottoes beneath St. Peter's, near the tomb of Pius X. This is not remarkable, many popes are buried there. But Pius XII wants his tomb to be in a specific location, and to prepare that location, workers must dig. It is routine work, or so everyone thinks. But as the workers dig down through the floor of the grottos, their shovels strike something unexpected. Not earth, but brick. Walls. Ancient walls. They have broken through into a space that no one knew existed. They have found the necropolis. The Vatican authorities make a decision that will prove momentous. Instead of simply covering the discovery and continuing with the planned burial, they decide to investigate. Perhaps there is something down here worth finding. Perhaps, in these ancient tombs, lies the answer to the greatest question in Vatican archaeology. Where, exactly, is St. Peter buried? The Christian tradition is clear and consistent. Peter, the chief apostle, was martyred in Rome during the persecutions of Emperor Nero, probably around 64 AD. According to ancient accounts, he was crucified upside down in the Circus of Nero, which stood just south of where the basilica now rises. His followers took his body and buried it nearby, in this necropolis on the Vatican Hill, in a simple grave that became a shrine almost immediately. Over the centuries, Christians came to pray at this spot. When Constantine became emperor and Christianity became legal, he chose this site, this specific location on the slope of the Vatican Hill, to build his great basilica. Not because it was a good location, architecturally it was not, it required massive earthworks to level the slope, but because this was where Peter lay. The entire basilica, one of the largest churches ever built, was positioned to place its main altar directly above one simple grave. But was the tradition true? In 1939 there was no proof. The location was believed, venerated, but not verified, and so the excavation begins in secret. The timing is terrible. Europe is descending into war, but below the Vatican, a different kind of campaign begins. It is called the Excavations of the Vatican Necropolis, and it will take 10 years of careful, painstaking work. The man in charge is Monsignor Ludwig Kaas, a German priest and scholar who becomes obsessed with the search. He works almost every day for a decade, descending into the necropolis, directing workers, examining every stone, every fragment. As the excavations expand, revealing tomb after tomb along the ancient street, Kaas becomes convinced that somewhere in this underground city lies the grave they seek. The clues are tantalizing. The street runs east to west, but it ends, abruptly, at a certain point beneath the center of the basilica. There, the tombs stop. There is a gap, a space where no family tomb was ever built. This unusual burial space was expensive, and every foot was valuable. Why would this section remain empty? The answer, Kaas believes, is that it was not empty. It held something else, something so important that no Roman family dared build their tomb too close to it. It held the shrine of Peter. As you stand now in that spot, in the cleared space where the street ends, you can see what the archaeologists found. The tombs on either side face this empty space, as if acknowledging something important. And in the center, there is a wall, old and damaged but still partially standing. It is brick, covered with ancient plaster, and it is covered with graffiti names and prayers scratched into the surface by countless hands over centuries. Peter, pray for us. One inscription reads, Peter, remember your servant, reads another. This is the red wall, named for the reddish color of its plaster. It dates to around 160 AD, and it was built to enclose something, to mark something as special. Behind and beneath the red wall, the excavators found a small chamber, and in that chamber, a niche cut into the earth. It is tiny, barely large enough for a body, cut directly into the clay soil of the Vatican Hill. No marble sarcophagus, no elaborate tomb. Just a simple hole in the ground, carefully preserved, carefully marked, carefully venerated for nearly 2,000 years. But was Peter actually here? The niche was empty when the excavators reached it. Whatever it once contained was long gone, removed in ancient times when the basilica was built. Perhaps moved to a safer location. The excavators searched desperately for any physical proof. They sifted through earth. They examined bones found in niches near the red wall. For years, they found nothing conclusive. Then, in a storage area of the necropolis, in a box of fragments that had been set aside and forgotten, a discovery was made. An inscription, broken into pieces, that when assembled read, Peter is within, and bones, wrapped in expensive purple cloth, interwoven with gold thread, the kind of cloth used only for the most honored dead. The bones were examined by a forensic anthropologist. They belonged to a man, aged 60 to 70, robust build. The bones were stained red with earth, the earth of the Vatican Hill. And curiously, the feet bones were missing, perhaps because they had been nailed to a cross and could not be removed intact. The Vatican announced in 1968, after years of study and debate, that the bones of St. Peter had been identified. Not everyone accepts this conclusion. The evidence is circumstantial, not definitive. But what is certain, beyond any doubt, is that this place, this small niche beneath the red wall, has been venerated as Peter's grave since the 2nd century. Christians died believing he was here. Emperors built, churches believing he was here. And whether the bones are his or not, the faith of 2,000 years has made this spot sacred in a way that transcends archaeological proof. You stand in the silence of the necropolis, looking at the red wall, looking at the graffiti prayers, looking at the niche where a fisherman from Galilee might have been laid to rest. The weight of history presses down. Above you, 5 stories of Basilica rise toward the sky. But here, at the foundation of it all, there is only this: a simple grave, a wall of prayers, and the unbroken thread of memory stretching back across 2 millennia. As you walk back along the street of tombs, retracing your steps through the necropolis, you begin to understand that you are walking through a moment of transformation. This street, this city of the dead, was in use for roughly 200 years, from around 100 AD to around 300 AD. During those 2 centuries, the world changed. Rome changed. And you can see that change recorded here, in stone and paint and prayer, in the slow evolution of symbols and hopes. The oldest tombs, those dating to the early 2nd century, are entirely pagan. The families who built them believed in the old gods, followed the old customs, held the old hopes. When Marcus Caetennius Antigonus decorated his tomb with peacocks and portraits, he was expressing a Roman's understanding of death and afterlife. Not Christian notions of resurrection and judgment, but older, hazier ideas of continued existence, of the spirit living on in some form, honoured by family, sustained by memory and ritual offerings. You enter one of these early tombs again, looking more carefully now at the details. The artistry is sophisticated. The frescoes show scenes from daily life banquets, hunts, processions. There is a sense of celebration, almost of defiance. Yes, we are dead, the images seem to say, but look at how we lived. Look at our wealth, our culture, our refinement. Death has not diminished us. We are still here, still worthy of respect. The gods depicted in these tombs are familiar to anyone who has studied Roman mythology. Dionysus, god of wine and revelry, appears frequently an appropriate deity for the afterlife, promising continued pleasure and celebration. Mercury, guide of souls, is shown leading the dead to their rest. The 3 fates appear, spinning and cutting the thread of life, a reminder that death comes to all and is part of the natural order. But as you move to tombs built later, in the mid to late 2nd century, you begin to see changes. The artwork becomes more ambiguous. A figure that might be Orpheus charming animals with his lyre, or could it be Christ, the Good Shepherd, calling his flock? The symbol could work both ways. A man with arms outstretched in prayer or supplication. Is he a Roman orator or a Christian in the traditional prayer pose, the Oran's position? This ambiguity was intentional. In these middle years, Christianity was spreading but was not yet legal, not yet safe to proclaim openly. Christian families who could afford tombs in this necropolis were wealthy, Romanized, moving in the same social circles as their pagan neighbors. They could not advertise their faith too openly without risking persecution, confiscation of property, or worse. And so they developed a visual language of symbols that Christians would recognize, but that pagans would see as merely decorative. You find one such tomb, belonging to a family named Valeri. The main chamber looks conventionally pagan. There are the usual mythological scenes, the usual elegant decorations. But in a side chamber, smaller and more private, the symbols change. There, on the ceiling, small and easily overlooked, is a mosaic. It shows a sun chariot being driven across the sky, a common Roman image. But the driver has a halo, and there are grapevines surrounding the chariot, possibly a reference to Christ saying, "I am the vine." It is ambiguous enough to be safe, clear enough to be meaningful to those who know what to look for. On one wall, almost hidden in a corner where the lamplight barely reaches, you see a small carving. It is a fish, the ichthys, the most famous early Christian symbol. In Greek, the word for fish, theapsilons, is an acrostic, Iesus Christos, Theouios, Sota, Jesus Christ, God's Son, Saviour. This simple image, quickly carved, perhaps by a family member during a private visit, is a quiet declaration of faith, in a time when such declarations could be dangerous. You find more of these hidden symbols as you search. An anchor, representing hope and stability, but also, in its shape, a disguised cross. A dove with an olive branch, peace and salvation. The Chi-Rho symbol, formed by the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek, worked into a decorative pattern. Alpha and Omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, carved small near the floor. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, Christ said, and his followers repeated the words in secret, in code, in symbols only they would understand. By the 3rd century, as you reach the newest tombs in the necropolis, the symbols become bolder. Christianity, though still illegal, is spreading rapidly, and the old pagan certainties are fading. These later tombs show a fascinating religious mixing, a syncretism where old and new beliefs coexist awkwardly. You see tombs where pagan gods share wall space with Christian symbols, where families hedge their bets, honouring both traditions, perhaps unsure which promised the better, afterlife, or perhaps simply respecting the divided beliefs within their own families. One tomb in particular captures this moment of transition perfectly. It belongs to a family of imperial freedmen, former slaves who had been freed and who had prospered in the imperial bureaucracy. The main fresco shows a traditional Roman funerary banquet, the deceased reclining on a couch, surrounded by family, servants offering food and wine. It is a scene of continuity, of the hope that the pleasures of life would continue beyond death. But in the background of this same fresco, painted by the same artist at the same time, are small figures that tell a different story. A man with a staff, tending sheep, the Good Shepherd, one of the earliest and most common Christian images. A woman with arms raised in prayer, the orange figure that symbolized the praying church. And in the corner, a boat on water with figures aboard, perhaps Jonah and the whale, or perhaps the ship of the church, sailing through the storms of the world toward the safety of heaven. This family, it seems, wanted everything. They wanted the Roman tradition of the funerary banquet. They wanted the new Christian promise of resurrection and salvation. They wanted the continuity of pagan custom and the hope of Christian redemption. They were living in a world that was changing beneath their feet, and they responded by embracing both past and future, old gods and new God, in a spiritual mixing that would have horrified more orthodox believers, but that to them made perfect sense. As you stand in this tomb, looking at its competing symbols and divided hopes, you realize that you are looking at Rome itself in microcosm. This is what the transition from pagan to Christian empire actually looked like at the human level, not a sudden clean break, but a long, slow blending, a generational change, where families negotiated between old and new, where symbols accumulated and meanings shifted, where the past did not so much die as slowly fade, becoming less distinct, less certain, until one day it was simply gone and a new world had taken its place. The necropolis preserves this moment of change in perfect stillness. Above, in the world of the living, Christianity had already won. Constantine had legalized the faith, built this basilica, declared the empire Christian. But down here, in the silent streets of the dead, the old gods still watch from their frescoed walls, and the new god appears tentatively, in symbols and codes, as if the outcome was still uncertain, as if the transformation could still go either way. Before we go deeper, before we descend to the lowest levels beneath the Vatican, we must pause and consider something that is easy to overlook. The existence of this necropolis, preserved intact after 16 centuries, is not an accident. It is the result of a remarkable feat of engineering, accomplished by Roman builders working for Emperor Constantine in the 322nd AD. What they did was both practical and extraordinary, and understanding it helps you appreciate the space you are standing in. Imagine the problem they faced. Constantine had decided to build a great basilica to honor St. Peter. The location was predetermined. It had to be built directly over Peter's grave, which was on the slope of the Vatican Hill in the middle of this necropolis. But this was a terrible site for a large building. The Vatican Hill slopes steeply from north to south. The necropolis sits at an angle, half carved into the hillside, half built on terraces. You cannot build a huge basilica on a slope. The foundation must be level. The obvious solution would have been to demolish the necropolis entirely, cart away the rubble, level the ground, and start fresh. This was the Roman way, practical, efficient, thorough. But Constantine could not do this. The tomb of Peter was in the necropolis, and it could not be disturbed. Moreover, many of the other tombs held the remains of Christians who had deliberately chosen to be buried near Peter. These graves, too, were sacred and could not be casually destroyed. The solution the Roman engineers devised was brilliant. They would not demolish the necropolis. They would preserve it, perfectly, by filling it in. They would turn the tombs into a foundation, a platform on which to build the new church. And so, methodically, carefully, they went from tomb to tomb along the ancient street, filling each one with clean earth, packing it carefully to support weight. They filled the street itself. They filled the spaces between buildings. They brought in thousands of tons of soil and rubble and raised the level of the entire Vatican Hill by several meters, creating an artificial plateau, perfectly level, strong enough to support the massive stone basilica. The engineering was sophisticated. They did not simply dump dirt and hope for the best. They built massive retaining walls to hold back the hillside. They constructed arches and vaults to distribute weight. They created drainage channels to prevent water from accumulating and weakening the foundations. And in doing all this, they created a time capsule. Because the tombs were filled rather than destroyed, because the earth packed around them was clean fill without air pockets, because the construction above sealed everything from light and weather and the disturbance of later generations, the necropolis was preserved in almost perfect condition. The frescoes did not fade because no sunlight reached them. The structures did not collapse because the earth supported them. The decorations remained intact because no vandals or treasure hunters could reach them. For 16 centuries, the necropolis existed in perfect darkness, in a state of suspended animation, unknown and forgotten, directly beneath the feet of popes and pilgrims who had no idea it was there. The only indication of its existence was the tradition, the persistent story that Peter was buried somewhere beneath the basilica. But stories are not maps. Until 1940, no one knew exactly where these tombs were or that they had survived. You can see the evidence of Constantine's work in the necropolis. In places, the original Roman burial street rises up and meets the later fill. The transition is clear: ancient paving stones topped with packed earth and rubble. In some tombs, the earth fill has been excavated away by the archaeologists, but you can see where it once reached, where the Constantine-era workers stopped their filling, where the preservation began. The roof of the necropolis, the floor of Constantine's basilica, is visible in places. It is a massive platform of concrete and brick, Roman concrete that has lasted 16 centuries without cracking. The Romans knew how to build for eternity, and they did. The basilica they built stood for over 1,000 years before being torn down and replaced with the current structure in the Renaissance. But the foundations, Constantine's foundations, the preserved necropolis, remained undisturbed, supporting first the old basilica, then the new one, strong and silent and secret. From an engineering perspective, what Constantine's builders accomplished was astounding. They took an ancient cemetery on a steep hillside and transformed it into a stable, level platform capable of supporting one of the largest structures in the ancient world. They did this without modern equipment, without precise surveying instruments, without power tools. They had mathematics, experience, and thousands of labourers working with ropes, pulleys, earth baskets, and simple determination. The scale of the project was enormous. The Basilica Constantine built was over 350 feet long. Leveling the site required moving thousands of cubic meters of earth. Building the retaining walls and foundations required quarrying, transporting, and placing thousands of tons of stone. And all of this had to be done carefully, respectfully, so as not to disturb the tomb of Peter, which remained accessible throughout construction, preserved at the center of the new platform, like a precious relic protected in its shrine. As you stand in the necropolis now, looking up at the ceiling of packed earth and ancient concrete that separates you from the basilica floor far above, you are looking at the bottom of Constantine's achievement. You are standing in the space his engineers chose to preserve. You are breathing air in a place that was sealed when the Roman Empire was Christian, when Latin was still the living language of the streets of Rome, when the memory of the apostles was still only 3 centuries old, instead of 2 millennia. The preservation was so complete that when the excavators of 1940 first broke through, they found lamps still in their niches, oil long since evaporated, but the ceramic containers intact. They found wooden beams, 16 centuries old, still sound. They found textiles, colours still visible. They found glass vessels, unbroken. They found a city of the dead that looked as if its inhabitants had left only yesterday, as if they might return at any moment to light those lamps and tend those tombs. The decision to preserve rather than destroy, made 16 centuries ago by engineers working for Constantine, created one of the most remarkable archaeological sites in the world. And it allows you, standing here now in this narrow street, to walk through a moment of history frozen in perfect darkness, to see exactly what Rome looked like in the centuries when Christianity was being born. You climb back up the narrow stairs from the necropolis, leaving the ancient Roman street behind. As you ascend, you are travelling forward through time, rising from the 2nd century into the medieval period, from the age of Constantine into the age of Gothic architecture and Renaissance art. You emerge into the Vatican grottoes, that first layer beneath the basilica, and you pause to catch your breath and adjust to the change. The grottoes are still underground, still dim and cool and quiet, but they feel entirely different from the necropolis below. Where the necropolis is ancient and mysterious, the grottoes are sacred and solemn. Where the necropolis is pagan and Christian mixed together, the grottoes are purely Catholic, a gallery of papal tombs stretching back centuries. This is where recent history rests, where the leaders of the church sleep beneath the church they led. The space is larger than the necropolis, the ceiling higher, the layout more organized. You are in a series of interconnected chapels and corridors, following the outline of Constantine's original basilica, which stood here until the 1500s, when it was demolished to make way for the current structure. Parts of the old basilica were preserved and incorporated into the grottoes: ancient columns, fragments of mosaic floors, medieval frescoes that once decorated walls now buried beneath the new church. You walk slowly through these spaces, reading the names on the tombs. They are a roll call of papal history, a who's who of the church across the centuries. Here lies Pope Pius XII, who ordered the excavations that discovered the necropolis below. His tomb is simple, surprisingly modest for a man who wielded such power during the dark years of World War II. His effigy shows him lying in repose, hands folded, face peaceful, as if he is merely sleeping. Near him is Pope John Paul II, the Polish pope who dominated the late 20th century, who travelled the world, who helped bring down communism in Eastern Europe. His tomb is visited by thousands of pilgrims who remember him, who were alive during his papacy, who feel a personal connection to this recent saint. Fresh flowers lie on his tomb, left by visitors just hours ago. The stone is worn smooth in places where hands have touched it, where lips have pressed in reverence. You see Pope John Paul I, who died after only 33 days in office in 1978, whose sudden death sparked conspiracy theories that persist to this day. His tomb is modest, his reign too brief to leave much mark on the physical church, though his death changed the course of history by bringing John Paul II to power. Further along, you find older tombs, popes from the Renaissance and Baroque periods. Here is a tomb from the 1600s, elaborately carved with angels and papal symbols, the effigy dressed in full ceremonial robes, every fold and detail rendered in marble with breathtaking skill. The artist who carved this spent months or years creating this image of eternal rest, this frozen moment of papal grandeur. The grottos are not just for popes. Here and there, you see tombs of cardinals, of important church officials, even of secular rulers who earned the privilege of burial near Peter. Queen Christina of Sweden is here, the monarch who abdicated her Protestant throne to convert to Catholicism, who lived in Rome as an eccentric, cultured patron of the arts. Her tomb is ornate, befitting a queen, though she died with little of her former wealth or power. As you walk, you notice that the styles of the tombs change over time, reflecting the artistic fashions of their eras. The medieval tombs are simpler, carved from dark stone with Latin inscriptions and minimal decoration. The Renaissance tombs become more elaborate, with realistic effigies, classical architectural elements, references to Greek and Roman art. The Baroque tombs are the most dramatic, with writhing angels, dramatic poses, elaborate allegories in stone. But beneath all this variety, there is a common thread. These are all men who believed, who devoted their lives to the church, who died believing that Peter was indeed buried somewhere near here, and who wanted to rest as close as possible to the first pope, to the rock upon which Christ built his church. They are arranged in a kind of hierarchy of holiness, with the most recent popes closest to the centre, closest to the spot directly above Peter's shrine in the necropolis below. You reach a chapel that is particularly beautiful, tucked into a corner of the grottos. The ceiling is painted with frescoes that somehow survived the demolition of the old Basilica saints and angels looking down from a heaven of gold and blue. In the centre of the chapel is an altar, and beneath the altar, visible through an iron grate, you can see down into the necropolis below. This is one of the viewing points created by the archaeologists, a window between the modern church and the ancient. Cemetery, a visual connection between the living faith above and the dead below who kept that faith alive. The light in the grottos is soft and golden, coming from electric bulbs designed to look like candles. The effect is timeless. You could be in any century, any era. The only sounds are the whisper of your own breathing and the distant echo of footsteps as other visitors move through the space. There is no music, no ceremony happening at this moment. There is only silence and stone and the accumulated weight of centuries of faith. You pause before one last tomb before leaving the grottos, that of Pope Boniface VIII, who died in 1303. His effigy is severe, his face carved with sharp, angular features, his expression stern and unyielding. This was a man who claimed absolute authority for the papacy, who fought kings and emperors, who declared that it was necessary for salvation for every human creature to be subject to the Roman pontiff. His reign was controversial, his legacy mixed. But here he lies, reduced to stone and silence, equal in death to all the others, waiting for the resurrection he proclaimed in life. The grottos are a reminder of something easy to forget in the grandeur of the basilica above. For all the gold and marble and artistic genius, for all the power and pageantry, the church is ultimately about this, about faith, about death, about the hope of resurrection, about ordinary humans trying to bridge the gap between earth and heaven. These popes, for all their authority and importance, were men. They aged. They died. They were placed in tombs, just like the pagan Romans in the necropolis below. The only difference is the hope they died with, the belief that death was not the end, but a transformation, a passage from this life to something greater. There is one more descent to make, one more layer to explore. Beneath the necropolis, beneath the tombs of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, beneath even the shrine of Peter, there is something older still. There is the Rome that existed before Christianity, before Peter walked these hills, before the apostles came to this city. There is the original Vatican hill, the natural landscape that the Romans first encountered when they expanded beyond the walls of their growing city. Access to this deepest layer is restricted. Most visitors never see it. But for tonight, in this journey through time and stone, we will go there together. The archaeologists created a few exploratory trenches, narrow cuts going down through the floor of the necropolis, down through the street level, down into the earth beneath. You descend a ladder, carefully, into one of these trenches. The space is tight, barely wide enough for one person. The walls of the trench are raw earth, mixed with fragments of older construction. As you descend, you see the stratification, clearly layers of soil and debris, each representing a different period of use. There are fragments of pottery, shards of amphorae that once held wine or oil, pieces of tile, bits of broken brick. Each fragment is a remnant of daily life, of the ordinary Romans who lived and worked on this hillside before it became sacred. At the bottom of the trench, perhaps 5 or 6 meters below the necropolis street level, you reach the original ground surface, the Vatican Hill, as it existed in the 1st century AD. The soil here is different natural clay, mixed with volcanic tuff, the geological foundation of Rome itself. You are standing on earth that has not seen daylight in 2,000 years. The archaeologists found traces of earlier construction at this level. There were walls, not from tombs, but from simple structures, perhaps workshops, perhaps storage buildings, perhaps the houses of the poor who lived on the edge of the city. These buildings were demolished when the necropolis was established, cleared away to make room for the tombs of the wealthy. But their foundations remain, ghostly outlines in the earth, evidence of a humbler, earlier use of this space. You also find evidence of the Circus of Nero, the great racetrack and arena that once stood just south of where you are now. The circus was enormous, capable of holding thousands of spectators who came to watch chariot races and, during times of persecution, to watch the execution of criminals and enemies of the state. According to Christian tradition, many of the early martyrs died in that circus, including possibly Peter himself. The circus is long gone now, demolished centuries ago, its stones carried away to build other structures. But traces remain at this deepest level, fragments of the foundation walls, pieces of the seating structure, even sections of the track surface, worn smooth by countless chariot wheels. Standing here, at the bottom of the excavations, you are standing at the level where Peter would have walked, where he would have seen the Vatican Hill, as it truly was not a sacred site, not a burial ground for the faithful, but simply a hillside on the edge of Rome, green with grass and trees, dotted with simple buildings, ordinary and unremarkable. This is the beginning point. This is where the story starts, not with grand basilicas and papal tombs, but with a simple hill, a circus where people died for entertainment, and a small group of believers who took the body of their executed leader and buried him nearby, in the only place they could afford a common cemetery, among pagans and strangers, with no monument, no marker, just a hole in the ground, and their memory of who he had been. Everything else, the necropolis, the shrine, the basilica, the grottoes, the centuries of faith and art and power, all of it grew from this moment. From this simple act of burial on an ordinary hillside 2,000 years ago. You can see the entire history of the church in these layers of earth and stone, built one upon another, each generation adding to what came before, building higher and higher, until the simple grave was buried beneath 5 stories of human devotion. You climb back up the ladder, leaving the deepest layer behind, emerging once more into the necropolis street. The ancient Roman tombs surround you again, silent witnesses to the transformation you have just traced. They were here when Peter was buried. They watched as his grave became a shrine. They were carefully preserved when Constantine built his church, and they wait still in their perfect darkness, holding the memory of a world that has passed away. It is time to return to the surface, time to leave the silent depths and return to the world of light and life. Your guide leads you back through the necropolis one final time, past the tombs you have come to recognize, past the red wall and Peter's shrine, back to the narrow staircase that leads upward. The climb is longer than you remember. Your legs feel heavy, as if the weight of 2,000 years has settled into your bones. You place your hand on the stone wall for support, and you can feel the coolness of it, the slight dampness, the reality of all that earth and history pressing in around you. Up you go, step by step, leaving the 2nd century behind, rising through the medieval period preserved in the grottos, climbing toward the Renaissance splendor that waits above. You pass through the grottos more quickly now, giving only brief glances to the papal tombs that commanded your attention. You have seen something older, something more fundamental, and these later centuries seem almost modern by comparison. The popes sleep peacefully in their marble beds, but beneath them, supporting them, giving meaning to their authority, lies that simple grave around which everything else was built. The final staircase brings you back to the basilica floor. The heavy wooden door swings open, and suddenly you are overwhelmed by light. After the dim underground chambers, the basilica seems impossibly bright. Sunlight streams through the high windows, reflecting off gold and marble, filling the vast space with a warm, honeyed glow. You blink, letting your eyes adjust, feeling the warmth on your face after the cool of the depths. The basilica is busy now. It is midday, and tourists crowd the space, their voices echoing off the walls, their cameras clicking, their feet shuffling across the marble floors. They look up at the dome, at the bronze baldachin over the main altar, at the famous Pietà behind its protective glass. They are seeing the surface, the visible glory, the artistic achievement. And that is enough. It is beautiful, overwhelming, worthy of awe. But you carry a secret now. You know what lies beneath their feet. You know that every step they take is supported by tombs, by prayers scratched into ancient walls, by the bones of Romans who died believing in gods that no one worships anymore, by the carefully preserved grave of a fisherman who became the foundation of an empire of faith. You walk slowly to the center of the basilica, to the spot directly beneath Michelangelo's magnificent dome. Above you, the dome soars into the heavens, decorated with mosaics of saints and angels, Christ in glory surrounded by golden light. Below you, 5 stories down, is the red wall, the niche, the place where Peter may have been laid to rest. You are standing at the axis of the entire structure, the point around which everything revolves. The bronze baldachin rises before you, designed by Bernini, twisted columns reaching upward, angels and decorations in gleaming bronze. It stands over the main altar, the papal altar, the spot where only the Pope himself may celebrate Mass. And that altar is positioned precisely, exactly, directly above Peter's shrine. Every measurement, every calculation, every architectural decision for 1600 years has been made to preserve this alignment, this vertical connection between heaven and earth, between the fisherman's grave and the dome that reaches toward God. You look around at the other visitors. An elderly woman kneels in prayer near a side chapel, her lips moving silently, her hands clutching a rosary. A young couple holds hands, looking up in wonder at the scale and beauty. A priest walks by in black cassock, nodding respectfully to those he passes, on his way to some duty within this vast complex. A tour guide leads a group of Japanese tourists, explaining the history, pointing out famous artworks, her voice a distant murmur in the acoustic complexity of the space. They are all part of this, whether they know it or not. The church that Peter founded, that Constantine legitimized, that centuries of believers built and decorated and defended, continues here, in this moment, in these ordinary acts of faith and tourism and daily work. The depths below are silent and still, frozen in time, but here above, life continues, faith continues, the story continues. You walk toward the exit, passing beneath arches and columns, past side altars and chapels, each one a work of art, each one representing some saint or mystery or moment of church history. The Pietà Michelangelo's masterpiece, Mary cradling the dead Christ, carved from a single block of marble with impossible tenderness, draws a crowd as always. People press close to the protective glass, staring at the Virgin's face, at Christ's wounded body, at the perfection of the carving that transforms cold stone into flesh and grief and love. Near the door, you pause one final time and turn back. The entire basilica stretches before you, the long nave, the crossing beneath the dome, the apse at the far end glowing with golden mosaics. Light and space and colour combine into something transcendent, something that lifts the eye and heart upward toward the dome, toward the heavens, toward whatever lies beyond. But now you know the other direction as well. You know that depth is as important as height, that the foundation is as sacred as the dome, that what lies buried and forgotten is what makes all of this possible. The church built upward toward heaven, yes, but it built downward too, down into the earth, down into history, down into the darkness, where the first believers hid and died and hoped for something better. You step out into the sunlight of St. Peter's Square. The colonnade embraces you in Bernini's famous arms, drawing you into the open space where thousands can gather. The obelisk rises in the centre, ancient Egyptian stone brought to Rome in antiquity, repurposed by the church, standing now as it has stood for centuries, marking this place as special, as set apart. The modern world rushes around you, tourists taking selfies, vendors selling souvenirs, Swiss guards in their Renaissance uniforms standing at attention. But you carry the underground with you, the memory of those silent streets, those painted tombs, those whispered prayers in darkness. You have walked through layers of time. You have descended to the foundation and returned. And you understand now, in a way you could not before, what this place really is, not just a church, but a vertical journey through history, a bridge between the living and the dead, between past and present, between earth and heaven. What do the depths beneath the Vatican teach us? What wisdom rises from those buried streets and forgotten tombs? Perhaps they teach us about continuity, about the way human hopes and fears remain constant across millennia. The Romans who built those tombs wanted what we want to be remembered, to matter, to leave some mark upon the world that will outlast our brief lives. They wanted their children to remember them, to visit their graves, to say their names. In this, we are no different from them, separated by 2,000 years and an entirely different understanding of the universe, yet somehow the same. Perhaps they teach us about transformation, about the way the world changes beneath our feet, even as we imagine it is permanent. Those pagan families who decorated their tombs with gods and goddesses could not have imagined that within a few generations, their gods would be forgotten, their religion abandoned, their symbols misunderstood. The world they knew ended, a new world began. And we, living in our moment, believing it is solid and permanent, should remember that our world too will pass, will transform into something we cannot predict or imagine. Perhaps they teach us about faith, not just Christian faith, but the broader human capacity to believe in something beyond death, beyond the visible, beyond what can be proven. The pagans believed in their afterlife, vague and uncertain as it was. The early Christians believed in theirs, specific and demanding as it was. We, in our time, believe in our own hopes for what comes next, whether religious or secular, whether confident or tentative. The specific content changes, but the need to believe, the refusal to accept that death is simply the end, this persists. And perhaps, most importantly, they teach us about hiddenness, about the way the most important things are often buried, invisible, forgotten by the surface world. Peter's grave was hidden for centuries, lost to memory, preserved only by tradition, and the determination of builders who filled the necropolis with earth rather than destroying it. How many other important things lie hidden, beneath our feet, beneath our awareness, waiting to be rediscovered? In our own lives, we walk on surfaces, seeing only what is immediately visible, rarely considering the foundations that support us, the history that shaped us, the buried choices and forgotten sacrifices that made our present moment possible. The Vatican necropolis reminds us to look deeper, to ask what lies beneath, to remember that every present moment rests on layers of accumulated past. As you settle in tonight, wherever you are, whatever time it is in your part of the world, perhaps you might think about your own foundations. What lies buried in your history? What forgotten moments shaped who you are? What is hidden that deserves to be remembered? The tombs beneath the Vatican wait in their perfect darkness, patient and silent, holding their secrets and their dead. The Basilica rises above, golden and glorious in the Roman sunlight. And between them, in that space of connection, we find the true story, not just of the Church, not just of Rome, but of humanity itself, building upward toward hope while rooted deeply in the earth, reaching for heaven while remembering the dead, always trying to bridge the distance between what we are and what we dream of becoming. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the depths. Thank you for walking those ancient streets with me, for descending into darkness and returning to light. I hope you found it peaceful, enlightening, perhaps even moving. If you enjoyed this exploration, please consider liking this video and subscribing to The Restful Historian. There are many more journeys to take together, many more forgotten places to explore, many more stories waiting in the shadows of history. Until next time, sleep well and remember, beneath every surface there is depth, beneath every present there is past, and beneath every ending there is always, somewhere, a beginning. Good night.